All right, so we're going to be talking about the difference between lymph, between plasma, and between extracellular fluid. Chemically, all of the three liquids are chemically the same. It's just they're called different things where they are found in different parts of the body. So we're going to start with plasma. So if we look at the top of our screen, we can see that this right here is a blood vessel. And we know that it's a blood vessel because of some of the things that we have in the blood vessel. We have our red blood cells, which we can identify is a red blood cell because one, it's red. Two, it has like a donut type shape, so it's a biconcave disc, so a donut with a filled in donut hole. And there's no nucleus, so they have a lifespan of 120 days. Then we have our platelets, which look like cell fragments. Again, they also don't have a nucleus, and they're much smaller. They're responsible for blood clotting. And then we have our white blood cell. How we can tell it's a white blood cell is one, it is transparent. So that's the first part. The second thing is that it has a nucleus type. Well, it has a nucleus, so they all have nuclei. And it's also an irregular shape. Now, there's a variety of different types of white blood cells. We're not going to go into the details here, just that our white blood cells are found not only in our blood vessel, but also in our lymphatic vessel. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, our red blood cells, our platelets, and our white blood cells are all suspended in the liquid component of blood, which is plasma, which is shown by our transparently off-white, yellowish color that we have in our blood vessel. Now, one thing that you have to understand is that dissolved in our plasma, we are going to be having nutrients that are going to be dissolved in our plasma. So I'm just going to change the color here. So we'll have nutrients, particularly glucose, amongst other things. We'll also have cell waste. We'll have antibodies, which are made by the white blood cells. And you'll have also hormones that will be suspended into your plasma. Now, these things that we have outside of our blood vessel, so these things are cells of the body. Now, the cells of the body are not just there. There's going to be small spaces in between the cells of the body, and these small spaces are going to be filled with, you guessed it, liquid. And we call this liquid in the small spaces in between our cells of the body extracellular fluid. Okay, now the extracellular fluid will also have in between, you'll have nutrients, because if nutrients are in the bloodstream and the plasma, when they're trying to get into the cell, they're going to leave the cell wall of the blood vessel, be in the extracellular fluid, and then from the extracellular fluid, go into the cell. At the same time, you'll also have cell waste, right? Because the cell waste will exit the cell and form in the extracellular fluid, and then this cell waste will either flow, will basically flow through the membrane of our blood vessel or not. And you'll have antibodies, and you'll also have hormones, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, there needs to be a way, because our blood vessels will leak some plasma. It just happens. It will go through the cell membrane. You're going to have a way to collect this extracellular fluid, because if you don't collect this extracellular fluid, the extracellular fluid will just accumulate and accumulate. And if your blood vessels are losing the plasma, there also has to be a way to re-uptake this liquid into it. So that's why we have our second set of vessels, which are our lymph vessels. And these lymph vessels have specific holes, so it's an open system for extracellular fluid to flow into it. So as a result, in our lymph, we will have our nutrients, we'll have cell waste, we'll have antibodies. Why? Because anything that was in our plasma, right, from our blood vessels that leave and is dissolved in the liquid and ends up in our extracellular fluid will also end up in our lymph. The things that don't leave the blood vessel, the red blood cells don't leave the blood vessel. So our red blood cells stay in vessel. That's why you don't see it in the extracellular fluid. Our platelets stay in vessel. That's why you don't see it in our extracellular fluid. That's why you don't see it in the lymph. Now, our white blood cells, they're special because they can do something called diapedesis, which means they can go in between the walls of the blood vessel to exit the blood vessel, which makes sense because our white blood cells have to go everywhere in our body in the event that there's an infection, and you're not necessarily just going to have an infection in the bloodstream. So ultimately, right, the difference between plasma, blood vessel, which has plasma. So the difference between plasma, extracellular fluid, and lymph, chemically, there isn't. It is a liquid, which is mostly made out of water, that contains nutrients, cell wastes, antibodies, hormones dissolved in it. The difference is where we find it. If this fluid is in the blood vessel, we call it plasma. If this fluid is in the spaces between our cells of the tissues of the body, we call it extracellular fluid. And if this fluid is in our lymph vessels, so this is our lymphatic. So if this fluid is in our lymphatic vessels, we call it lymph. Now, one thing that's extremely important is that lymph eventually makes its way back into the bloodstream. And where does this happen? At the lymph nodes. Right? Because there has to be a way for this liquid to make it back into the bloodstream. And it's important because cell waste needs to get removed. So this liquid has to get back into the bloodstream so the blood can be pumped to the kidneys, where the kidneys will remove the cell waste. There's also going to be nutrients, right? So this nutrients can then get recycled and then go to other cells in the body. So that's the relationship between plasma, extracellular fluid, and lymph.